welcome to a new episode of the Hustle for Good show. I am so happy to have Halleemah Nash. How are you, Halleemah?
I am amazing, Steve. Super happy to be here.
So we were introduced by our mutual friend, Claire, from Know Your Company. And so I met you when you were the ED of a mentoring organization. So why don't you tell everybody like who you are and what you do?
Yes. So I'm Halleemah Nash. I am a social entrepreneur and an executive for good. I am the chief partnerships officer of an organization called the Academy Group, which helps students to sort of push through transitions, whether that's middle school to high school to college, and then college to career, with the hope of leading and guiding them to be owners and operators of their own businesses and the future of economic innovation. And I'm also the CEO and founder of an organization called Rosecrans Ventures, which does coaching specifically for Gen Z underrepresented talent.
That's awesome. And so when you think about like, you know, I'm super excited to talk to you because like before we started talking about just the role of mentoring and how we're both advocates for mentoring and diversity, inclusion, and the belief of young people. So, I mean, how would you sum up like, what is your hustle for good? Like, what is your hustle?
My hustle for good is I believe deeply in Black and brown brilliance. I believe deeply in underrepresented talent, women and girls, LGBTQ, Generation Z rock stars. I think that it is in the marginalized communities where the depth of innovation exists. I think that it is no coincidence that the Michelle Obamas of the world came up in the South Side of Chicago, that people like Nipsey Hussle came up on Slauson and Crenshaw. These are people that, you know, according to your generation and, you know, how you think about things, are leaders of movements. And so for me, how can mentoring power more opportunities for young people to sort of have someone to hold up a mirror to show them the talent that exists in them, you know, how does, you know, sort of internship opportunities, after school programs, how do they power opportunities for young people to truly see themselves as owners, operators, as entrepreneurs, as policymakers, as world changers? And so for me, every single job that I've had, Steve, from the time I got out of college to now, has been about powering communities that look like me. I'm from Compton, California, and, you know, I remember specifically going to college, and I went to Howard University, so I went to a Black college. And, you know, when you say you're from Compton, people are like, oh, wow, you know, oh, you know, let me, you know, clutch my pearls, right? You know, because there is this stigma that's attached to our urban communities. There's a stigma that's attached to immigrant communities. And so for me, you know, I was always interested in the neighborhoods that I came from, the neighborhoods that represent me, those that are marginalized and those are represented. And how could I take my college degree? How could I take my network? How could I take my skills and my talents and pour specifically into that community? And so that started with sports philanthropy, working at the Chicago Bulls, and you know, developing strategies for the sports team to develop powerful relationships and partnerships in the West Side community. That expanded to working at Chicago Housing Authority, where I got to develop a strategic plan for young people that lived in public housing. That extended to mentoring opportunities, leading an organization called iMentor that did one-on-one mentoring for young people in neighborhoods in the South and West Side of Chicago that attended schools that had very little programming. And now that's extended to now thinking about workforce development as an engine to do this work.
That's super powerful, and I love how you answered a whole bunch of questions that I didn't even ask yet. But the one thing that I want to ask, because I kind of know, I remember my moment, right? Like the moment where I realized that the hustle could be, it was just like that first inkling, and it was like I was on the train, I was in New York, and there was this guy, he was selling his book hand to hand on the subway. I don't know, did you ever read the book No More Prisons?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God, you totally should. But so anyway, so he wrote in the book, he talked about community activism, self-education, and this little thing called mentoring, right? And And I read it and he was like, yeah, I have 20 mentors. And I was like, who would you be if you had 20 mentors? Right? And that was like my first inkling to the path of like my hustle for good, right? What was that first moment where you recognize it doesn't necessarily have to be mentoring, but like maybe it was mentoring, but like what was that first inkling, that first moment where you realized like, oh, this is a life path?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was my freshman year at Howard University. I always thought that the way to sort of change the trajectory of my life was just make a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I majored in business management. I was thinking about changing to finance because I thought I was going to work on Wall Street, make a ton of money, buy my mom a house, get my family out of the hood. And so, following my first internship in finance, I had an opportunity to talk about my internship experience and my story at a school called Banneker, which was a school a stone's throw away from Howard University. And sitting in that classroom with those 34 students talking about coming from Compton, California, going to Howard University, first in family to go to college, and working on Wall Street just for a summer, I was literally watching the light bulb go off in the eyes of these students, of these African-American girls, at these young Black and brown Latino young men. And it made me come alive. And I thought, wow, I could actually do more than writing a check. I could actually do more than just making a ton of money.
Yeah, yeah.
What I can actually do is build bridges between the life that I'm building and the community that is so important to me.
Yeah.
The idea of reaching back as I climbed started at that moment freshman year. And then I did it all 4 years. I really leaned into volunteerism. I leaned into speaking at schools. I leaned into mentoring opportunities, Circle K, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. It just was this fantastic thing that I didn't even know was a career path.
Yeah.
It just was something that was exciting to me, but I didn't change my major, Steve. I continued to major in business. I continued to do internships in business, and every single internship, even my graduate school, going to Duke University, I decided that I wanted to do business, yes, but nonprofit management was something that I also was interested in because it always had to be connected to communities.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So you found your why by serving and sharing your story, right? And maybe the lesson in there is that we all have something to give and to share. Mm-hmm. And yep. Were there moments where you doubted this career path, this decision?
Oh, absolutely. It's, I'm 13 years in and I was just doubting yesterday. So, I think that imposter syndrome is real. It does not matter how long you've been in your career.
Yeah.
And imposter syndrome is just this thing that eats away at you that, makes you question whether you belong in the spaces that you're in. I have so frequently found myself the only.
Yeah.
Even though I am in social impact, there are very few executive directors and CEOs of color that are serving communities of color.
Yeah.
And so as I worked my way up the ladder and found myself as a vice president of a city agency, I was sitting at a lot of tables where I was the only woman, or I sat at a lot of tables where I was the only African American, and I certainly sat at a lot of tables where I was the only person that actually came from the hood and came from the community that we were looking to serve. Yeah. And so it took a long time for me to see that as an advantage and not a disadvantage. And in seeing it as a disadvantage, I doubted, I am in these meetings where I'm literally warring and fighting for these communities that we are all here at this table to serve. And it felt purposeful to me, but it took really some courageousness.
Yeah.
To say, you know what? There is some value that I bring to this table because of my context. There is value that I bring to this space because of who I am. And, to anyone that is charting a path for nonprofit or thinking about social impact, because we're doing good doesn't mean that it's easy. And doesn't mean that the same things that people experience in corporate environments and, what you might experience in a law firm, doesn't exist. It actually exists. Sometimes it exists all the more because you are constantly engaged in this community that you are fighting for. And you are constantly, sort of thinking about how to elevate and ensure that you are leading from a shared experience at the highest level of organizations.
That's really interesting. So the imposter syndrome, the idea that like being like your advantages, what you perceive as disadvantages are your advantages, which almost kind of leans into like, hey, because I've often found too, because like, people serving underrepresented, marginalized communities, like I'm usually the only, Black male in philanthropy, like period, right? Like there are a lot more female, people of women of color in those communities, and there's almost like this unique perspective that you're like, okay, everybody's here, but then you're coming from this angle, and I think there's a power in being able to lean into that, like, yo, this is who I am, this is what I bring to the table. And when you think about, so like you went from, the college and then you started your first career, your first wins. And we talk about that moment where you realized your own power, where you can wield change and what that was like.
I think it was my first $1 million fundraising bag. So, the first, and I mean, this wasn't, I was so used to, in 5 years, you have you're hoping to get to $1 million, or you're leveraging $1 million worth of services, right? This was $1 million ask. That I was making. And I did all this work to prepare for this meeting with this high net worth individual. I'm fighting imposter syndrome. I'm over preparing. I'm overthinking. But, I walked into that meeting prepared. I walked into that meeting with my truth, talking about what it was like to be a young person without a mentor and all of the landmines that I had to sidestep and all of the mistakes that I had to make. And I did a little, tugging at the heartstrings. I learned a little bit about this person's mentor and how important it was to have that mentor invest in that person's hedge fund. And, it didn't take a follow-up. It didn't take a series of meetings. I got that $1 million in that meeting. Amazing. I got my yes in that meeting. And I remember walking away thinking, and I was sweating. I was so nervous, and I was so, I was thinking, okay, these are all the things that I'm going to have to do. This is going to be the first meeting. Then I'm going to send a report, all those other things. I walked away from that meeting understanding the power of story.
100%. Yeah.
And the power of a shared experience. Even though I was making an ask from a person that did not grow up in the same way that I did, I wasn't interested in sort of selling this sort of sob story of what it meant to, come from a low income community. What I was sharing was the power of story, the power of relationship, the power of brilliance, that these are the communities that have produced some of the greatest leaders of the last century. And my hope in securing this investment was to create that and to scale that all the more. And that's when I realized I could do this. I could fundraise. The fundraisers of the world, I was under the impression that, the people that raise the most money are people that actually go to school with folks that have a lot of money, right? And they're asking money from their peers. No, there are people crushing it in the fundraising space that are leveraging the power of story, leveraging the power of strategy. And that's what I realized that I could do.
Yeah. And, I think, I feel like in this community, like fundraising is sales ultimately, right? And if you can spin a really good story, people are like, oh, you're a good fundraiser. I was like, and this is kind of a next question, before it's a question about like, what do you think are the core fundamental skills that brought you to where you are? And like, I know for me, always being the outside person allowed me to view things like I was a detective. So I could peep interactions between people. I could see who was nervous, who was confident, who was overconfident, making up for the lack of self-esteem, like who was the popular person, who was the person with the most power. So you can kind of see if you can put yourself outside, and which is an advantage when you are not from the inside. From the outside, you can see everything. But I think ultimately what you are just talking about was like empathy, right? Like you have empathy for the communities that you're served because like you've been there and you're being able to go out, but then you're able to see what people with access and resources, because they don't even know what they're capable of doing or changing themselves. And so like you're like that bridge, and I feel like a good social entrepreneur is that bridge between the people that have the means and resources and the other. So I think, I mean, obviously I'm like maybe talking for you, but like you're like a good translator, right? And a good storyteller. But what do you think are the other things that really are the hallmarks that kind of brought you to where you are today?
You know, and you talked about it a little bit. You know, my superpower is multicultural fluency.
Yeah.
I speak multiple cultural languages. You know, like if you think of people that speak different languages, they don't even know when they switch to Spanish to French or from like French to English, right? They just do it.
Yeah.
So for me, you know, I've had to operate in a lot of different worlds, and I've had to thrive in a lot of different worlds because that's the grit that you get from having to figure it out at a very early age.
Let's stop there for a second. Honestly, what you just said is probably the biggest lesson for any professional out there, is to put yourself in these really uncomfortable environments so that you can establish that grit, right? Like, God, I don't know. I'm sorry to cut you off, but like,
no, yeah, I was blessed with discomfort at an early age. And with discomfort comes, you know, you're kind of forced to figure out how to navigate.
Yeah.
You know, which is why I started my company in this idea of coaching Gen Z talent to navigate structures and systems, because often we have been fighting for those systems to change.
Yeah.
That's likely the long game, you know, like that's the slow drip.
Long.
And you know, and there are people that are doing that work, Steve, and doing that work well. But my work is, if those systems aren't changing, if those structures aren't changing, how do you navigate and thrive in those systems? I'm going to focus on your ability to navigate right now in 2019, 100%. Because having to figure out how to navigate makes you fluent in a lot of different worlds. You have to figure out how to survive in any environment, even if that environment is intimidating, even if that environment is scary, if it takes some courageousness. Yeah. You know, my young people, I talk a lot to them about this idea of transferable skills. Yeah. You know, I had to figure out how to get to school across gang lines, taking the bus and walking. Yes. So I went into high school with experience in risk mitigation. I entered into my college experience with interpersonal relationship management because I had to figure out, I have 5 siblings, right? You know, that I had to basically help and get dressed for school in the morning. You know, like I am an expert in teamwork. Yeah. So those are the transferable skills that you kind of have to figure out how to master, and you're realizing that you've had mastery before you even entered into a company. It's just about making those things transferable in any environment.
Absolutely. And I feel like, you know, if we were to talk about the true hustle, I mean, what I almost feel like your Rosecrans Ventures is like your true hustle at the moment.
Sure. Oh my, it is the ultimate hustle. It is the hustle that all of my hustles have prepared me for.
So I get really excited when you talk about this, because when you look at what on the outside, you know, your so-called disadvantages are your advantages. It allows you to like observe your environment and learn how to navigate these systems. And like you said, like there are some people that are doing amazing work at the long game, but we can't wait. We can't wait for that to happen. There's change to happen at the moment. And so can you break down Rosecrans Ventures? Like what is it? Like how'd you come up with it? How'd you come up with the idea? What is it? And like what's the business model behind it?
Yeah, so I founded Rosecrans Ventures, and the name actually is a street that is Thruway in the City of Compton, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's the roadway that, you know, takes you through residential neighborhoods.
That's off the 105, right?
Yeah, it's off the runoff. Look at you. Okay.
Come on. You think I'm leaving downtown and I'm going to LAX. That's where I go through. Like I know. Come on.
Yeah.
I'm 15 years deep in LA. Like
yeah, man. Yeah, so you know what's up. So, I mean, I make that introduction for people that haven't spent time in the town.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry. I don't want to assume everybody's as fly as us, but you know.
Right. Everybody can't be.
Everybody
can't be. But I named it that because I realized the importance of figuring out how to navigate the local roads in order to be prepared to go into that big, bold future that takes you to the 105 freeway, that takes you to the beach, that takes you to
LAX. Yeah.
LAX, that takes you to
105 to 405. Yeah.
Takes you like to this future, right? That you're preparing for. And so the reason why I came up with it is because in working with young people, helping to prepare them for internship opportunities, helping to prepare them for, you know, transitioning into colleges and universities, which are very different environments, I realized that I saw a lot of them failing. You know, they had gone through these programs and they were getting fired from their internships because they navigated a conversation with their manager wrong. They were getting kicked out of school because they were posting things on social media that went against certain policies. And I thought, man, these are students that are actually in after school programs. They're actually, you know, like going to schools that are working hard to support them. And I was reminded of my career in mentoring. And this idea of one-on-one mentoring, you know, making the world of a difference. And I decided to take that a step further. You meet CEOs that get executive coaching after having 30 years in the business. What would it look like for a 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old to have an executive coach to help them navigate their first internship, their first year on a college campus, so that they learn how to influence up? So that they learn how to influence without authority, how to manage up and influence without authority, how they learn how to build social capital in spaces that can actually mean the difference between them having a successful trajectory or them just having 5 weeks on an internship. So I'm focusing on what I consider to be opportunity streets, right? You know, Rosecrans was an opportunity street, right? And if you figure out how to navigate it right, it can lead you to a really incredible place. So the business model is I'm doing one-on-one coaching with Gen Z underrepresented talent.
Amazing.
And my clients are parents, school systems, programs, and companies that are building internship programs that are focused on diversity, and they want to coach those interns towards success.
Amazing. So parents, school systems, companies are funding this, and then you're vetting this pipeline and then funneling them through either academic success or career development success.
Correct.
Boom, that's a sick hustle. That's a great, no. I mean, as somebody that's run a nonprofit for years and kids that have been super successful in my after school and, you know, youth development program, it like pains me. You know, you look on social media, like, what happened? You're like, yeah, you know, like they were the only Black kid in this all white school and they just couldn't hang.
They navigated it wrong, right?
Yeah, they found the wrong path, or they, you know, that like, oh, I'm going to take a gap year, and the gap year ends up being a gap 3-4 years. Yeah. And they don't end up on the right path. I mean, and I know that like whoever's watching this is, like, we're talking specifically to like youth development professionals, how like this conversation. But if you look at like the problem, it's about solving problems in any niche, in any industry. Like we just happen to be talking about what are the problems with that are happening to underrepresented young people with talent and with success in their DNA, but without the skills, the resources, and the relationships, they're failing, right? Like they're failing. But if you look on a bigger, deeper level, who has a vested interest in those young people's success? And it's schools, it's parents that can afford to pay, and it's jobs that want to diversify their talent pool, right? Long term.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I'm in my beta year, which is amazing. And so the coaching that I'm doing with the young people that I'm working with right now, one-on-one, is happening for free. Their parents are not paying. These are young people that I met. I am a transgender teen, African-American, headed to Harvard for my freshman year. And I have no clue how this is going to work. I'm going to coach you towards success in your first year.
Yeah.
I am starting an internship. It's my very first internship. I'm undocumented. I need some help in figuring out how to navigate fingerprinting and how to navigate some of these conversations. I'm going to coach you towards success. I wear a hijab, and I have this after school job, and I have a really great relationship with my manager that hired me. How do I talk about needing to pray to the east a couple of times a day? I'm going to coach you towards success in that conversation. So thinking about some of these conversations that take individualized supports, I'm really excited about working with some of these young people, and also beginning, again, I'm in my beta, so you know the entrepreneurship life. So I'm building out marketing materials, building out my website, but right now I'm just doing the work.
That's so
before I start marketing and all of those things, right now I'm doing the work of coaching, and I have 4 letters of intent from 4 major brands where I will be building out internship programs for next summer. I will be coaching entry-level talent for their business resource groups. And then I have a really, really amazing project that I'll be doing with a school district that's focused on how they can secure internship opportunities for students that are in their career and technical education track.
Amazing. Man, that makes me so happy to hear. Because I mean, it's such a needed thing, and I feel like for whoever's sort of watching, listening, it's like, okay, if there's something that you're really passionate about, right? Like Halleemah is passionate about the potential of young Black and brown people, right? Like because somebody believed in her. She had enough drive in her to pursue and knock down the barriers in her way for success. Similar to me, like somebody believed in me. I knocked down barriers. Things were put into my way. I grabbed the opportunity. And there's a generation of young people out there that are lacking opportunity. And there's 2 things. Like one is I just read online that the wealth gap is not closing.
No.
Like the Walton family is growing richer $4 million an hour, right? That's deep, right? And then the other thing too is, so I had an office space. I had an office space in Chicago, where I'm based, and it was inside of an advertising agency. And I remember every semester they have a new crop of interns, and I sat across from an intern at my desk and I said, "Hey, where'd you go to school?" She's like, "XYZ school in the Midwest." I was like, "What are you?" She was like, "I'm a designer." I was like, "How'd you get this internship?" And she's like, "Oh my God, my mentor, she helped me." She was like, "I'm from Kansas. I would come up to Chicago. Chicago was my dream. She set up meetings with me with all these other people." And I was like, "Do you have a website?" She was like, "Oh yeah, let me send you my website." I sent her website and I said, "Oh my God, there's no way any Black or brown kid is ever going to compete with her."
I believe it.
Her portfolio was a professional portfolio at night. Was she 21 years old?
Yeah.
And you better believe she got a job right away.
Yeah.
And whenever they had like a sprinkling of one or two Black interns, and I would do my duty to walk up to them and say, hey, how's this internship going? Mm-hmm. I was like, do you have a job? They're like, no, they kind of put me on this project. I was like, this is what you need to do. You need to get in before everybody else. You need to leave earlier than everybody else. You need to make sure that you do your own homework. Like I tried to like school, but I realized that's where it starts.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The career path and trajectory, it all is in the internship process. I mean, for me, that was it for me. Like
that's for most of us.
For most of us, right? Like,
yeah.
I was the only Black kid in a C-suite at a major corporation in college, and I didn't get a job there. I eventually got a job there.
Yeah.
But it set me up for success. And I realized that like what you're tackling, I love Rosecrans Ventures, and I love this as a hustle for good because you're making a massive impact on these careers, because like that one kid that you helped navigate to, Harvard or get that internship, it's going to have ripple effects in their community. Mm-hmm. You may be serving 10, 15 kids, but they can eventually impact 1,000, 5,000 kids, and then place the seed for, oh man.
Thank you so much. It's exciting, and what is even more exciting is I am on the verge. I'm about 85%. At every single one of my students that I will be coaching will have an employment opportunity for an internship next year. So I'm also securing employment on the front end. So I'll be coaching you, and you do well throughout this coaching experience, you'll have an internship at the end of this. I'm really excited about the employers that believe in my ability as an entrepreneur. These are people that I've sourced talent for them for years, which is why I feel like all of the hustles have led to this hustle. The parents who I met them when their children were in elementary school, living in public housing, their kids are now in high school, and they're saying, Halleemah, want my kid to go to college. Can you help? So much of this has been, leading up until this point. And, as many of us hustles do, we got double hustles, triple hustles.
You got double, triple hustles.
I'm leading the hustle in a lot of different ways, but just really excited about this beta phase and being able to report out on data and some of the experiences of my students.
That's amazing. I love it. So that's what's coming up next.
Yeah.
Getting out of beta. And then maybe last question is like, what does like the future look like for you? Like if you don't mind me like prodding into, because you remember when we started talking, I was like, it's not just about like, as people that are world changers, game changers, community changers, people that are looking to live intentional lives, but then be sort of like, make an impact, right? It's not like, what does the vision for Halleemah, the Halleemah empire, like look like?
Oh, I love this question. And I love that it's the last question. So this is my answer is always the same. And it's very unconventional, especially on a podcast where we're talking about entrepreneurship and we're talking about power and great work. For me, the future for me is personal. I am powering this great work for young people, but, like so much of my intentionality is, dating, looking to meet a wonderful man that I will build a life with, start a family, so that a lot of the work that I'm doing outward can also happen in my household. I'm the first in my family to own a home. I purchased a house in the Slauson Crenshaw district. So I am building for this next phase of my life that is my personal journey, which is love and family.
We don't follow each other on social media. I mean, on Facebook, but we will. I literally just posted this today. What you just said. So I'm blessed and I'm fortunate enough to be married. I have 3 kids. And I remember asking a super successful person, like, what do you want? And he was like, I just want happiness, health, and love. And I want the people that I know and to have love and experience love. And I know that we're talking about business entrepreneurship, but ultimately the work that you're doing is about love. It's about sharing that, and it's about giving and receiving love and having love in your life, isn't it?
Absolutely. That is the ultimate. That's what it's about.
And I love it too. So I'm gonna, maybe get off script just a little bit, but to get what you want, you need to prep for it.
Yes. Ooh.
You need to act as if.
Yeah.
So when you think about the life that you want, if that's the life that you want, you need to act as if right now
you have it.
You have it. And like literally it's like, like if you want a relationship, if you want wealth, it's about acting, being gracious and loving and like mentally preparing, like, hey, I am ready for this. Mm-hmm. And I had a mentor, actually one of the mentors that kind of got me, he's like, whatever you chase is also chasing you. And you know what I mean? And so anyway, I want all of that for you. I want it all. And you're going to have it. It's going to be awesome. It is awesome. It is awesome.
I'll come back to the podcast and talk about it.
I know. Oh my God. So what does hustle for good mean to you?
Yeah. So hustle for good, means taking what is inside you, matching it with ambition and effort to reach back as you climb. So it's almost like, take what's in your heart, what's in your soul to do. I have a book that I'm actually in my editing mode, but in the introduction I say, my soul purpose is my soul purpose.
Yeah.
My singular purpose, is that hustle that's inside of me, that thing that I want for the world, and making sure that it's for good.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. I'm so glad that we talked.
Me too. Thank you for having me. I love
you gave me a ton of fuel. I love this conversation. And I'll just kind of just say it, like, if you just need any help or just like a route or whatever, just like, I got your back. And I'll see you in a couple days. So
yes.
I'll see you in a couple days. But I'm very, very grateful for your time, and I love Rosecrans Ventures, and I love everything that you're doing. And thanks so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, good brother, and best to you. Keep hustling for good.
Thanks.